coming to the guest. Sweet, thanks. So this will be recorded and you'll be able to revise, because remember, our guest lectures in this course are examinable, unlike many other courses. And that's mainly to get you guys here and actually show up and ask questions and try and understand what's going on. And today, we're very lucky to have Caroline Lambert from the European Union delegation. So she's usually based up in Wellington, in charge of trade, so free trade agreements and things like that, but is also doing a lot of work on, what do you call it, climate diplomacy? Or
green diplomacy.
Green diplomacy. And Carolina also did a lot of work on the EU green taxonomy that we've talked about in class. So there's going to be a lot of information in this session around regulations that are happening in Europe, specifically related to finance. And I think we can learn a lot from Europe, and they're sort of leading the charge, and New Zealand maybe should follow some of those policies and maybe create our own versions of others. So without any further thing from me, over to you, Carolina. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. Kia ora koutou. I can't say how great it is to have real people in front of me. I've done so many Zoom presentations when I felt so alone, and yeah, thank you for coming here. So I'll talk to you about our sustainable finance strategy and how it's special and different from any other one around the world. I'll go very quickly on context because I have many slides, so I have to be very quick. But you know all about the Paris Agreement, right? All countries of the world agreed to make sure that we collectively reach a limit of 1.5 degree temperature rise, not reach that, it's a limit, so stay under, have targets, regularly upgrade them, and all of that requires finance and investments. I'll stop yeah, you don't need to hear that. Yesterday I tried it and it didn't work, but I don't think it's necessary, so I'll just, whoop, voila. What does it mean in terms of investment needs worldwide? What does the Paris Agreement mean? As you can see at the moment, according to it's an institute based in Brussels, called Bruegel, and they looked at the figures from the International Energy Agency. And the first bar, 2016-2020, shows where investments are going now, investments that are linked to the transition towards net zero. And the other bars are where the investments need to go to be compatible with the world decarbonizing. And so it's more than a double of investments that need to take place. And most of the investment has to go into the energy sector. So at the moment, around 2.5% GDP goes into the transition, and we need to go to 4.5% GDP. The sectors where there's most investment needs is not only electricity generation, but also in the new electricity management system, the digitalization of electricity, two-way flows, decentralization of the management of generation and of consumption storage. This means that the transition is also a strong business and investment opportunity worldwide. The science context, we've had an update from the IPCC in August, is that this is not just like any other issue. The climate issue is a time-bound one. It's an irreversible problem, and it's a problem that we need to fix within the next decade. Otherwise, if we don't fix it, basically runaway climate change locks us into a future where the survival of human beings is at stake eventually. So it means that the type of risk there is for us and for the financial sector is different from any other risk, because it's a very extreme binary black or white risk in the end. And this has been described as a green swan, different from black swan events, because green swans are environmental risks, which you can see coming very quickly, whereas the black swans, you don't see them coming. The green swan, you see the risk coming, but humanity fails to prepare, and it has a much greater impact than any other black swan, and it's unhedgeable. The only thing you can really do is to manage the risk. The conclusion for investors worldwide, capital markets, financiers, and governments is that climate change is a time-bound existential imperative, but it's also a major risk for global finance. What does it mean for policymakers? Well, it means that we have to decrease emissions this decade, and how quickly depends on your risk appetite. If you are a risk taker, you are happy with a 1 in 2 chance of staying below 1.5 degrees, then we may have a full decade for taking action. If you're risk adverse and you would like to have an over 80% chance of staying below 1.5 degrees, then we have only around 6 years left. And the type of emissions reduction curve that you need to engage on is the one that you see on the left. Collectively, the world at the moment emits over 40 billion tons. So we're up there. And for us to use our remaining carbon budget and meet 1.5 degree, we have to go on that slope here. Reduce emissions drastically in this decade. That means unprecedented levels of investments, even retiring some currently well-functioning fossil fuel-based investments, and accelerated civilizational change. So that brings a lot of risk to businesses as well, because the legislative risk is high. So, and what are the politics of sustainable finance? Seeing from the European perspective, we see a lot of demand for Paris-aligned investment products. And banks and corporates, they're often pressured by governments, and they are committing to redirect their focus towards less damaging activities and even green activities. But we don't see things yet happening to scale, and there's high risk of, not only risk, there's a lot of greenwashing. And so we have these two issues that to meet what we need to meet in terms of target this decade, we have to stop the greenwashing and we have to reach scale with private investments. Also, we see growing international rivalry because this potential reallocation of capital can have geopolitical consequences. And we see that in Europe at the moment, where Russia is restricting the flowing of gas into the EU markets, therefore increasing energy prices so much that now governments are wondering whether we should really follow these climate policies because energy prices are going so high and we depend on gas, whereas for coal, we had actually some reserves in the EU. So there is a lot of fear from some states, depending for their economic well-being on fossil fuel, acting internationally in ways that are not always helpful to fight a clear, quick transition. So this is creating geoeconomic tension. There are in the EU three-pillar approach to, not only in the EU, internationally, a three-pillar approach to sustainable finance. The first is about defining green. If we want businesses, investors to reallocate or to refocus towards another type of activity, we need to also tell them what type, what is green, what is compatible. And there's two main ways in which this defining green is done at international level, either a private standard or normative regulated definition. In the EU, we went for a normative regulated definition of what green is, so that across the European market, everyone understands green in the same way. The second pillar is the disclosure pillar. The idea is that companies and investors, by disclosing the climate risks on their business, different risks, physical risk, the climate impacts on their business, the transition risk that includes several risks, but a key one is the regulatory risk, the legislative risk, that suddenly a jurisdiction says, well, we're closing down all coal power stations as from that date, and suddenly you've got stranded assets. So the legislative risk, there's the litigation risk that is increasing in Europe. There's the reputation risk, the technological risk. Suddenly, in Europe, some governments say, well, we don't want any new conventional cars on our market. So here you go, automotive industry. It's the end. You've got to change your system. So the aim of the disclosures was to ensure that everyone was looking at their risks so that we would have financial stability. But of course, what's interesting with disclosures is then you get information that allows to price risk so that the capital flows go in the right direction. Now, the big question around disclosures is whether you only ask your financial sector to disclose risk or whether you also ask your corporate sector to disclose risk. In the European Union, we went for all-encompassing approach. So not only the financial sector, but also what we call real economy businesses. The third pillar is reporting and accounting. And here there's the crucial issue of materiality that is discussed internationally. So what should you report in your financial reports about environment? Should you only report these risks I've talked about that could be financially material to your business? Or should you also report the risk that your business are causing to the environment because it could be a polluting business? So this is the outside-in risk, the risk of climate or environment on your business, and the inside-out risk of your business onto the climate and environment. In the European Union, we've chosen the double materiality approach. We've chosen to push or to require our companies to disclose both types of risks. We also include a dynamic approach. So that is, our companies, they don't only have to say, so these are the risks that I'm subjected to from the environment, and these are my impacts on the environment. They also have to explain what is their roadmap, how they are going to manage both these risks across a certain number of years. So it's a dynamic and double materiality approach that we're taking. All of our response on these three issues, the defining green, the breadth of the disclosure regime, and then the breadth of the reporting regime, we believe makes us the only ones to have a comprehensive sustainability ecosystem of regulation that addresses all actors. And we would very much like to export this vision abroad. So what is, I'll go in detail in our approach. So first, a few sentences about us. We're 27 member states. We used to be 28, but that is a story I will not go in today. We're 450 million people, and for 70 years we've had peace. Now our project is a project for peace, for prosperity, and for solidarity within and outside of our borders. But the new big frontier mission for us is to become the world's first climate neutral continent. It's been made our leadership's priority, and all of our policies are redesigned for us to reach that goal. The costing has been done. It is about the same 18 times what it took to put man on the moon. So we've used that comparison to show that it is a mission approach, that every energy has to be focused on that goal, and that it was not unfeasible because 18 times putting man on the moon. And if you compare to also to all the finance that has been found during the pandemic, it's actually not all that difficult. And I'll show you later the amounts of investments that we need. We have a constitutional climate law, a little bit like New Zealand. We have to, in law, the goal of reaching net zero by 2050. And we've already legislated quite a lot on financial actors and corporate. I'll go in detail. Our goal is quite stringent, and that also changes a little bit our regulation for financial actors is done, because we are not planning on reaching that climate neutrality goal by buying offshore emissions reductions. We want to do that on our territory. And we also don't want to bank on too much on forestry removals or other land sector removals. We want actual decarbonization of the real economy. So a company cannot say I'm carbon neutral because I've invested so much in forestry that it compensates my other emissions. That won't work. That's not part of what is acceptable as a goal for us in the European Union. So we're also galvanizing finance. Our 5 trillion New Zealand dollars that are part of the recovery are all climate compatible in the sense that we've made sure there are parameters so that they do not harm climate change, so there's no fossil fuel related investments in the green stimulus. However, it's not all of it entirely climate relevant, I would say. There's lots of things we're doing in the health sector that you can't tag to climate specifically, but it's all been checked to be compatible with the mission. Yeah. The carbon budget. Half of the international legs are included. So all domestic, maritime and domestic aviation is included. Plus, we've included, for example, in the ETS, half of the international legs of every maritime shipping into and outside of the European Union. Yes. What are the investment required for us to meet our goal? So you have the similar things. You know, the first bar is what we're spending now. The second bar below is what we need to spend to reach our next legal goalpost. And it's about $500 billion more a year that we need to mobilize by 2050. And it's a lot in transport. That's the purple bits. A lot in transport and a lot in buildings, residential and tertiary buildings, that is making sure our buildings don't need energy, but actually produce energy. And so that's where the investment opportunities are too, of course. The sustainable finance framework which we've built is around 3 pillars. That won't surprise you. A classification of sustainable activities that is defining green, which is our taxonomy. Then the disclosure and reporting framework, that's now a new corporate system for reporting, and then a series of tools that help investors around benchmark, eco-label, green bond standards, etc., etc. And we started doing that in 2018, and we've progressed quite well. And we've just tabled a new policy package this year that goes beyond these 3 pillars, but I'll focus on what we've achieved so far today. So how does it work? It all starts from the taxonomy. And I'll talk in detail on the taxonomy, but I just want first to focus on the mechanic of it all. So the taxonomy the regulation was adopted last year, and it's a common classification of economic activities that are deemed to substantially contribute to environmental objectives. So it's like what used to be a huge phone book, where you check hydropower. Hydropower is hydropower. What are the metrics that make hydropower activity green or not? And you've got all the different metrics, and you can check whether your activity is green. And eventually we will have the whole classification for all activities that exist, or even hairdressers, anything. So it's a long work, but we've started, of course, with a high impact economic activities in our taxonomy. Once we had our taxonomy, we worked on disclosures, and that's number 2, and we've set up a comprehensive disclosure regime for both financial and non-financial institutions. So 3 main tools. We have a sustainable finance disclosure regulation that makes sure that the financial products that are offered to European investors are tagged appropriately to the EU taxonomy. So when you're sold an investment product, you can ask, it has actually a requirement to disclose if that product is entirely taxonomy aligned. So is it only focusing 100% activities that are green, or half aligned? So you've got a mix of activities that are green or not. Everything has to be benchmarked against the list of green activities. This way, we are stopping greenwashing in the investment field, in the financial products field, to ensure that people are not thinking their savings or their business is invested in something that is green when it's not. A second type of disclosure regime is the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, and this is a bit of a different one because it doesn't apply to financial products or the financial sector only, but to all businesses, as long as they are either listed on the EU market or have more than 200 employees. As soon as you've met one of the thresholds, you're captured, and you have to report according to the benchmark to the taxonomy. So you have to say the percentage of your CapEx, OpEx, or turnover that is green. we'll probably start with around 3% of listed, we think it's going to be around 3% of all listed companies in the EU that are going to have a green share of their activity being green, but the hope is that then we grow that over the years. And we have a third bit of legislation, which is called the sustainability preferences legislation, where it's now a legal requirement for anyone giving financial advice to first check with a client whether that client is interested in financing taxonomy aligned activities or not. So you just don't, that's part of your suitability tests, as they call it, when you want to procure financial advice or financial investments. And three, we have these tools, the green bonds proposal, the climate benchmark regulation, all of these tools align themselves to the taxonomy. So if you want your bond to be a green bond, you have to ensure that the proceeds will go to taxonomy aligned activities. So we're trying to make sure that the word green is not misappropriated and actually comes back to a hard science-based definition of what is sustainable. So I'll start by explaining how we came to the taxonomy and that science-based definition of what is sustainable or not. So yes, it's a list of economic activities that are considered environmentally sustainable. And the regulation we passed in 2020 is only a framework that defines how we will develop the metrics, the famous metrics for each activity. So it's the logic behind what makes some activity green. There are 4 conditions to be met for any activity to be deemed green. First is that your activity has to substantially contribute to one of 6 environmental objectives. Either you are helping humanity decarbonize, and so you substantially contribute to climate mitigation, or you're helping humanity become more resilient, so you substantially contribute to climate adaptation, or you are with no impact on water quality, and maybe even you're improving water quality, or you have no impact on waste stream, you're completely in the circular model, or you're helping to bring about the circular model, or you've got no impact on pollution prevention. So that's air quality, that's chemical pollution, that's even noise pollution is included in that pollution prevention and control, or you are protecting ecosystems, biodiversity, or even increasing biodiversity. So you have to prove that you substantially contribute. And how to define substantial contribution has been a big headache. And there's been different ways in which we went about it. But for mitigation, which is the one we developed the most, we decided that either you were already at 0 emissions, or you were helping others to go to 0. Typically, that's the case of solar panel manufacturing. Or you were in the 10% best performance of your class, and you have a plan to go to net 0. That would work, for example, for a steel making industry that is in the 10% cleanest of its cohort in a particular country. For us, it's the European Union. And that I also have a clear investment plan to bring that down further in the next 10 years. You also have to prove that you're not doing any significant harm to any of the 5 other objectives. So we don't want a solar company that harms biodiversity because of the way it operates or where it's located. So we make sure that there's no trade-offs between one environmental objective and the others, or at least no significant trade-off. There has to be no significant harm. And then we have minimal social safeguards that are typically those that are in legislation at EU level, international labor conventions. So it's more of a floor than anything else at the moment. And for all of that to be possible, we needed to define these technical screening criteria, that phone book, that big Excel spreadsheet, where we defined what is the metric that makes you substantially contribute and what is the metric that makes sure that you're not doing any harm. So I'll give 3 examples. a deep green, what we call a deep green activity, are activities that are already at zero from the mitigation perspective, or are already helping the decarbonization of others. And we don't feel we will have to change the metric because the metric is already zero. There's already no impact. So that will be stable over time. And then we have what we call these transition activities, where we have to continue, we will have to continuously update the metric that will make it more and more difficult for your activity to be called green over the time, because there will be technological progress. And because we need to eventually go to zero. So we're happy to have at the moment the front runners to be called green, but you will not have that front running tag attached to your activity for long if you're not striving for more. And then we have the so-called enabling activities that are those that help others. And so that's wind turbines, or for example, or already electric vehicles. And we believe that these criteria, these metrics will be more or less stable, but we will keep revising them as we go. So for each existing economic activity that has been covered by these criteria, we typically set two benchmarks. The one that is the harm, the do no significant harm threshold, and the one that is the substantial contribution threshold. And so those activities that do not meet the do no significant harm, for let's say, for example, a coal plant can do wonderfully in terms of resilience, completely gold-plated against any weather or climate impact. But that coal plant will never be able to say, I'm taxonomy aligned for adaptation, because it does harm on mitigation. It doesn't meet the do no significant harm criteria. So that every activity that's below that DNSH threshold is brown. And then we've got the substantial contribution threshold that makes over which you are green, and everything in the middle is transition. And the idea is to ensure that every activity in the transition zone has a plan to reach the green zone and finds finance and people interested in investing to bring that activity into the green zone. So what are the sectors we've covered with the taxonomy criteria so far? They're here. We covered around sectors that are responsible for over 80% of greenhouse gases emissions in the European Union. In particular, we've covered energy more or less, to the exception of nuclear. We have a terrible discussion about, politically heavy discussion about what we do with nuclear. We've got pro-nuclear member states that think, it's a potential solution. We've got the anti-nuclear member states saying, well, what do we do with the waste problem? It's not entirely circular. Gas is not yet, we will issue the criteria for gas in October. It's been also a battle. And as you can see, we haven't yet done agriculture, also because of political deep discussions about how to treat livestock. And so the criteria for agriculture will come out in October or December, I don't know, once we have reached an agreement. And so that's the whole difficulty with these criteria, because at the beginning we saw it's going to be all science-based and technical experts will set the criteria for us. But then when it comes to the political level for imprint and publication, that's when you realize, well, there are big economic implications and it's a very political process at the end. So we're trying to keep it as, to keep the politics out of it, but it's not easy. So why does it help businesses? So we are not qualifying any particular asset as green or not, or business as green or not. We focus on an activity. So a business can have several activities. And a business will have to report OPEX, CAPEX, turnover, and say what part is taxonomy aligned, meets all the criteria to be green. And that may change over the years. And the idea is that through the reporting system, every corporate has an incentive in becoming greener, and that there is an incentive in the financial markets to also give finance to these businesses that want to become greener, because that will make that business greener, but that loan will also be green, and that will also make that investor greener in its reporting. So what is the effect of the taxonomy regulation? So it creates this common language for everyone, the companies, the policymakers, the financial institutions, about what is sustainable, and that transparency and security, is you're not doing any greenwash, is what has attracted policymakers, but also the financial sector the most about the idea. That is the same rules for everyone on the EU market. No more a different system in one country to another. Yes.
Sorry, just on the last slide, I just want
So that's been a concern of some governments, and that's why they've asked us to work more on the transition sectors. So that when you're, well, we don't care about the brown ones going out. Well, in a sense, we want to stop these activities on the EU market. What our worries are the transition ones. We don't want this leakage to happen for the transition activities. And so we're doing more effort in terms of explaining why it's actually better for an investor to, in terms of reporting, and then we'll make the difference, whether you bring an activity, if you bring an activity from the transition zone to the green zone, that will give you more brownie points than if you invest in already green activities. In a sense, yes, we do need a lot more solar panels and a lot more windmills, but it's even more important for transition for someone to bring that stock of buildings from being energy costly to being energy positive. So that's a whole difference into the reporting system for the financial sector will ensure that we have that discrepancy, that granularity of reporting as to what of their activities were in already green, whether their investments were in already green activities as compared to these investments where they have moved people from the gray zone into the green zone. So we'll see. That's how we've at the moment answered that worry of leakage. And we also have the borders, of course, the border adjustment system for the ETS. We hope that will ensure that we are not displacing emissions, which would be a worry. Well, at the moment, the brown things are those that do not meet for example, in the energy sector, are those that do not meet the 100 grams CO2 per megawatt hour. Sorry, the 250 grams CO2 per megawatt hour, which is the GNSH threshold. And that means that coal, even with CCS, would never. So that's gas could. Steel could. So we're basically through GNSH at the moment put in the brown category those activities that are already stranded assets. We believe coal is a stranded asset. We can't keep it in the EU. Steel is not necessarily a stranded asset. There are technologies that can bring you into a green zone. So steel should receive investments to be brought into the green zone. Well, no, because we have this border adjustment system now that will tax products coming onto the new markets with the EU ETS price, taking into account their incorporated carbon content. So on the EU market, we will have that level playing field. On the world market, no. Yeah. It helps. So what does it do? It also helps companies switch to sustainable economic activities because it shows them the target. What is the metric I need to meet to become green? It mitigates fragmentations, and it helps us develop other policies that all use the taxonomy as the reference point. For example, we're trying to ensure that our public budgets, our public finance, just as, of course, the private, if we're asking the private sector to benchmark themselves around this greenness, we should do the same with taxpayers' money. So we are developing this also for the public sector. So this is a summary of how the taxonomy is used throughout the financial value chain. Retail investors, now we're asking this new legislation that makes sure that every retail investor, first question is, are you interested in taxonomy aligning green activities? Is that what you want to do with your pension fund, with your savings or not? Investors, of course, have to explain how their financial products are taxonomy aligned, and we've got the labels for benchmarks, for green bonds, for eco labels. The companies have to report and benchmark themselves according to the taxonomy, and then we're developing the public use that just explained our different funds to ensure that they are as taxonomy aligned as possible. We do not yet have legislation on that because our public funding design needs more time to adapt, but we hope within 3 years, at least for all the EU budget, we are able to benchmark ourselves to the taxonomy and meet all criteria to have as much alignment as we can. Of course, some things we do with the public budget are not high impact activities. It's difficult to tag education necessarily. Do you count as green in education? So we've got all these questions to answer. All the information that is disclosed goes into one single freely accessible database. It's called ESAP, and that then allows the information to be in a public domain. It's all published in digitalized, searchable format. That makes it easier for financiers to also understand what is it that I am invested in, and is it green or not. It will include the companies once they start reporting. It will have all will go into ESAP. Yeah. Yeah, there's all sorts of nice data mining that can be done once it's all encompassing. At the moment, it has all of those that already are reporting according to national. So the French, every national legislation there is in the EU already uses ESAP. Yeah. So what is the work completion timeline? There will be 6 taxonomies in the end, not only the mitigation one that we've developed so far, which is what makes you green from the climate perspective without harming the others, but we also need to work on the others. So what we've done with the mitigation, we've covered, as you've seen the sectors. We've also issued the first adaptation taxonomy that tells you what it is to be green, to be resilient without harming the other sectors. But we have to complement the mitigation taxonomy with agriculture, with gas, with nuclear or not, and some manufacturing activities that are not high impact. We haven't done then the shoemakers, for example, textile industry. So we still have to create metrics for lots of industries. And then we need to make the 4 other taxonomies, what the metrics for what does it mean to be substantially contribution to biodiversity without harming the others. So it's a lot of work. We've already tabled a draft for the 4 remaining taxonomies out for consultation. So you can see, and for each of these 4 taxonomies, we looked at the most impactful activities for be it waste or water or air pollution or biodiversity. We will report on the transition taxonomy soon to explain why we are not only focusing on a green niche and are also with this regulation helping the activities that are in transition to go towards green. And we are also working on a low impact taxonomy, because some sectors were saying exactly like the shoemakers, well, I will be disadvantaged because there's no metrics for my activity, so I will not be able to benefit from a green loan or any. So please, can you also develop metrics for us? And so we will do that. And we've also been asked to create a significantly harmful taxonomy, which de facto exists through the DNSH criteria, but the Greens in particular and the NGOs wanted us to compile the list of activities that should not be financed in the EU anymore, which is a very controversial category. And we were, yeah. Well, we haven't done yet. It's true, like New Zealand, like Ireland, with a pasture system tends to have a lower impact for mitigation. However, remember, there will be the DNSH, notably on water. And I don't think that many of the livestock farms here would meet the DNSH criteria for water. So it's more complicated. It's not one single aspect of being sustainable. It's all of them. And so when I discuss with the farming sector here and MPI, et cetera, I explain, yes, you may be great with methane, but there are all the other issues that come into play that you need to have a look at. It's too early to say. So the Aotearoa Circle has worked on SAFI, the Sustainable Agricultural Finance Taxonomy, which was based on our earlier version of ours. But because I haven't seen our new one, I can't, our final one, I can't tell you whether it's going to be more or less ambitious than the New Zealand one. With our new legislation on agriculture, we are going we're quite ambitious. So I think ours in the end would be stricter. But until the thing is published, I dare not say too much. And we're working on a social taxonomy. It's already been published, the draft of it, and it's highly interesting. It's about making sure that there are activities that that help the just transition. Very quickly, the double materiality approach to reporting. So that is the diagram I explained inside out and outside in. We're looking at both angles, and that shows you what the TCFD scope is compared to what our scope is. TCFD scope is the impact of people and environment on the company, whereas we were also looking at the impact of the company on people and environment. And this is also financially material. So the coverage of the company reports will have to, all companies will have to report on the 6 criteria, 6 taxonomy criteria that you see here. These are the social criteria of the reporting and the governance criteria of the reporting. The reporting will have to be not anymore in a glossy corporate sustainability environmental report. Will have to be in a financial report that is looked at by the board and will have to be audited. The format will have to be machine readable and it will be enforced with sanctions. Yeah. 1, 2, 3.
Or will that just be what the company itself is?
It's going to be scope 1, 2, and 3. It may take some time for some companies to be able to go to scope 3. So there are timelines in the legislation, but the ambition is to cover all scopes. So what are the extraterritorial elements of that? For financial market participants, it's all that are registered in the EU that will have to report, but they will have to report wherever the finance activities take place. So of course, the footprints of our financial sector it goes much beyond the EU itself. And the draft regulatory standards will apply from next year. So they have already seen what is the format that we require for the disclosure, for the disclosure and the report. For corporates, it's all listed companies, including SMEs, and all non-listed large companies with over 250 employees, those that operate on the EU market, including the subsidiaries. So I explained the OPEX, CAPEX, and the proportion of the turnover, but it's wherever the activities take place. So it also is wider than the EU territory as well for the reporting. And but the reporting itself will only start in 2024 for the year 2023. And member states also have to use the taxonomy for their labeling schemes. So you can't have, a green bond by a municipality called the green bonds unless it is aligned to the EU taxonomy criteria. What are we working on now? We're working on a transition. We're also working on inclusiveness. This is the whole discussion around just transition, also to ensure that retail investors can benefit from that. So we're talking green mortgages, so that you get a better mortgage rate for your home if it's energy efficient, for example. We're working on resilience, and that is stress testing all the banks and even the whole economy to climate risks. And we're working on our global ambition to ensure that our system is taken up by other jurisdictions. And we've created that international platform on sustainable finance. These are the members. New Zealand is a member. It covers 55% of the global GDP and of emissions. And these group of countries under our chairmanship are working on a common ground taxonomy. So a definition system of green that would work across all these jurisdictions. The group is led by the EU and China, and that will help, of course, companies that work internationally to have an automatic system that allow them to report in jurisdictions using the common ground taxonomy on top as a benchmark. And the group is also working on disclosures, and we're pushing for a more encompassing approach to disclosures and explaining our system. So we'll see, but the idea is also to try to approximate step by step the disclosure system across these jurisdictions. So what are we seeking? We're seeking an ambitious consensus on international forums. We want our platform to go deeper into the structures of each of the jurisdictions so that we can align. And we want to support the low and middle income countries scaling up their access to sustainable finance. So to sum up, what are we trying to do in the EU? We're trying to lead by example. We're using diplomacy, we're using trade, we're using our development cooperation. But, and that's the last box, and the one that is perhaps the more important for the sustainable finance bit, we're trying to set standards thanks to the spread of the web of our finance, of our corporates, the strength of our EU internal market. We can set standards internationally, and that's what we're trying to do. Yeah, that's it. I went through my 34 slides. Any questions? Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone got any questions for Carolina?
I'm just interested, did the group do any kind of scoping or like customer research of like the investors and how much demand there is out there for the companies that fit into the taxonomy? So I guess I'm wondering, how much push is there going to be for companies? Are they going to be thinking they're going to lose their investment if they don't get amongst this, or is there just a kind of a small sector of investors that are wanting to invest in this way?
The main worry we had from investors was that, but there's not enough green around for us to invest in. We would like to put, where are the green activities? There's nothing that fits your criteria here. And so it's really why we're focusing on transition now and saying, well, not raising expectations too much. We're saying, we know that when you will all start reporting, it's going to be a low level of green. It doesn't mean, it's going to be a low level of green also because you're doing things we do not have yet metrics on. So it's okay to have 3% taxonomy alignment. It's okay. We start from there and then we will grow. We developed the criteria, not with the real economy sectors, but with the financial sector. So we had a technical expert group, which has now transformed into a platform. And it was by design that we didn't put the real economy sectors, but the financial sector in there, because they were going to be the main users. And less in the lobbyist type of approach than the real economy sectors would have been. So it's been designed hand in hand with them so that it's workable for the financial sector.
Thanks for a fascinating
presentation, but where does the TCFD disclosures fit into this EU taxonomy?
It's the sustainable reporting bit. So, do I have to go back? Previous, I can't use that. So it's included within, no, I don't know how to go back.
You
Crazy.
can use the arrows on the keyboard.
Oh, yeah, you're right. It's the corporate source. It's this one. So our legislation, one part of it is the TCFD scope, but it also encompasses the other bits, and that's this Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which we tabled in April. And so you can Google it and read it, and it includes all the TCFD. So TCFD compatible, but it has all the other elements on top.
Still waiting in on
We will, I'm not sure we're going to adjust our own legislation to what the TCFD comes out, but the principle framework is there.
Any other questions, guys? No. So then join me in thanking Carolina for coming.
Thank you very much.
And we'll stick around outside in case anyone wants to come have a chat for a little bit before we go to lunch. Cheers, guys. I'll see you next week.